Hello, everyone. Hello, my fellow ninjas. I'm Jonathan Crow, Director of Community at NinjaOne, and welcome back to another Like a Ninja live stream. We've already got folks eagerly waiting here in the comments. Love to see you back. They're eagerly chanting, shouting for our guest here. We have none other than Mikey O'Toole. You may know him as homotextual in our Discord, super active in our Discord, super active on GitHub. Super active in MSP Geek, all the places where people are gathering and sharing helpful things. Mikey is there. Halo, their Discord as well. Mikey, I think every time we look at our stats and see, who's the most prolific person in our Discord, I think if we're tiering things, you're S tier. and then there's a sizable gap.
October wondered if I passed away.
But no, thank you so much for taking time and as always being such an awesome contributor. We super duper appreciate it, and you're a big reason why our community has gotten as large as it has and is attracted so many awesome people who we also see in the chat. Chris Thomas, Striker.
That goes to your team, Jonathan. Massive chunk of that goes to your team.
Well, thanks for that too. I mean, I say it all the time. I have the best job at Ninja by far. It's making places and opportunities for all of us to get together and share and interact. So thank you everybody for joining us. So Mikey, today we're talking about probably, I think, like the easiest thing to drive, the easiest thing that human beings really like to do, and that's change, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Change is fundamentally easier than what people like to do. They just really will never say they like it. They like it after it's happened. They don't like the process of change.
Okay, fair enough. I was teeing you up there for a very different reaction because as everyone who's on the chat here and who is in our Discord, which I'll pull up if you're watching this and you're not in our Discord yet, come join the fun. I'll put a QR code and a link here in the chat in a second. But anytime we change the colors of people's names and things and roles, there's an uproar.
IT folks definitely don't like change.
Change is reviled. It's hard. It's difficult even for the folks who are driving it.
Yeah, but it is also the natural order of things, and I think we've all had that time when we've been like, I don't want to change. I hate change, and then actually the changes come along, and you look back and you're like, what was all that fuss about?
I mean, I'm with you. Anytime, I like to say that the only constant. This is not my my unique quote, right? I'm stealing this one, but the only constant is change, right? If you're not, the real question is, are you going to be the one driving it, or is it going to happen to you? I guess.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
So, we were talking a little bit before we went live. Tim Miller, yes, there is a Discord link to come. But
Josh, I literally did for October. I literally fell off the face of the earth. I was completely absent from every community for the entirety of October. Just crazy busy.
So we noticed. Everyone noticed. They're like, Mikey, you're here. Where is Mikey? And then when you would appear every now and then, and they'd be like, where have you been? What are you doing?
Mostly reassuring people that I hadn't in fact died and wasn't decomposing in a small puddle somewhere.
Do a wellness check. Oh man. But you have been busy, and we were talking before going live here that a lot of that business is because you were actively rolling out some changes, and beyond that, you were actually stepping back and looking, how is your change management process going, and you were kind of refactoring that. So
yeah, our weird recursion when we were doing our own change control tickets to change how we do change. That got a little bit confusing for a while, trying to lay out like how we were changing how we change control, and I'm already lost. Yeah, that was just too much. Like at its most basic, for most of us, we'll be familiar with a fairly linear approach to change. Customer requests change is discussed and evaluated. Well, maybe. Change is then approved or declined. And hopefully, if you're really, really on top of things, you'll document the change and potentially the discussion around the change, if you're feeling ritzy. And all too often MSPs, including ours for a long time, and strictly speaking, I've got two. One where I'm very involved and one where I'm just less involved. Focus on the logistics of change, the hard process, the how of change. That's important, very important. But focusing too much on that has an unfortunate side effect, which is that industry-wide, about 70% of change initiatives fail due to poor communication. So poor communication of the change, of the process, of the expected outcomes, ineffective leadership, either from the customer or from the MSP, and lack of clarity on the change itself. This one used to bite us consistently. Either the customer misunderstood the change we pitched them, or we misunderstood what they were actually asking for and changed something completely different. Effective communication around change needs to go beyond just disseminating information, which is typically what, as MSPs, what we're kind of comfortable doing. What we like to do is disseminate information and then kind of try as much as possible and step back and blend into the background and just let things happen. Light touch. Light touch doesn't work for change. So the key element we find that drives the success of change initiatives is having our customers' employees, or our own if we're doing internal change, share in the vision and demonstrate genuine enthusiasm for the change. And that's hard. That's very hard to do. Because change can be unsettling, as you've very correctly pointed out. And I will own up to having been clued into the fact that my name had changed on the NinjaOne Discord from a lovely orange color to some lurid pink. I am not okay with this change. This change is unsettling and emotionally quite painful for reasons I don't fully understand, but it just was. Effective communication can help manage the unsettling aspect of change and also the other emotional aspects that go along with change, that feeling of loss of control, that things are happening to you rather than with you. So ensuring that your team internally and your customers' teams can communicate about change openly and empathetically helps people feel heard, helps them feel supported. It helps them feel empowered to make change. Because MSPs, we can't really make change. We can make change internally, but we can't make change for our customers. We can help them move things along, change things, but actually most of us are not in a position where we're a fairly strict MSP, especially when it comes to security. And even we can't just unilaterally change things for customers. We tried, they don't like it very much. You have to bring them along with you. And part of that we've realized is reforming how we approach change control and having our customers champion the change. Really having those kind of people who put in the service desk tickets, so not our points of contact, not our decision makers, not our managers, but our kind of bottom rung staff at our customers drive the change. So that's what we're increasingly doing, is taking change from a bottom up rather than a top down. Which is rather an interesting flip and something we're still doing currently. We started about 6 months ago, got about 2 months into changing how we were going to approach change. The word change is going to sound weird in a minute. I'm going to get to that point where you've used a word so much and you're like, yes. Is that how it's pronounced? Change.
Oh, yes.
But about 2 months into how our program kind of changing how we were going to manage change, we stopped. We realized that actually the approach we were taking wasn't working. We were initially just going to continue we were going to continue with our change process the way it was and just beef up communication and how clearly we presented change. And we realized that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to result in any improvement. We kind of spitballed and beta tested some stuff with customers and how they were feeling and how they responded to the change in communication, and it just wasn't enough. And industry-wide, about 70% of change initiatives fail. For us, that was at 85%. 85% of the change initiatives we proposed to customers would just fail. They would stall, they would burn out, or they would achieve a different outcome from what we desired.
So this stat was crazy. So you called this out earlier when we were talking before you went live, and I'm just curious with those who are watching us here in the audience, how that lines up with you. And Mikey, you were saying, the discussion here is really kind of general because I think it's what you've stepped back and you're looking at the change control and management process from a higher level, and you've discovered some things that apply really across the board, no matter what kind of changes you're talking about. But can we get a little bit more specific here? I'm just curious, in terms of 85%, the failure rate here, what types of changes are we talking about? Can you give a couple examples?
Anything from the small things upwards, really. So we'll pick an example from the end of last year. Most of our customers are fairly well aligned to kind of Cyber Essentials benchmarks for the UK. And we underwent a change to how we manage passwords last year, in keeping with the guidance. So we didn't pull something completely out of thin air and invent our own wacky password requirements, like must contain 12 emojis. We were going industry standard, moving to passphrases. That was the change, moving to passphrases as the minimum. So dropping complexity requirements altogether and focusing on length. For some customers, this was fine. They did not have any issue. Nice. I like this. This is great. This is good philosophy. So most customers, fine. A few customers just completely bounced out of that change control process, just saying, oh no, we can't do this change. People won't remember the passwords. They won't remember passphrases. It'll be too long. It'll be too scary. It'll be too different. They won't be able to use the passwords they've been using. They'll have to change their passwords. And what we found from reviewing how that process went was that, typically, because it's the theme of the webinar, so why else would I pick this example? But it was our communication that was at fault. When we explained the change, we focused a lot on the change to length and removal of complexity, and absolutely no focus on the benefits of passphrases, how they are drastically easier to remember, how they help staff because they reduce repetitive patterns and poor password hygiene, all this wealth of evidence around passphrases, and we just neglected to talk about it. We assumed that they would do what we would do. They'd go and Google why a passphrase is better than passwords, and they'd find this body of evidence from NCSC and GCHQ and however many other government bodies telling them that passphrases are great. And actually, they didn't do this. They just looked at the length change, went, nope, and shut down completely. And then just before we started changing how we change, we were pitching Dynamics 365 CRM to a nonprofit. Now, this is a nonprofit that have 30 staff, 42 volunteers, 74 spreadsheets to manage various services. So 74 individual complex Excel spreadsheets across different strands, none of which link up with each other. They're all very siloed. Mm-hmm. 2 separate CRM systems already, one built-in Access, and please don't everyone throw up at once, and one built on Salesforce, but built on Salesforce and managed by a partnership external to them. So they have no control over it. They can't use the API for Salesforce. They can't use telephone integrations. It's just a Salesforce thing that they can't do anything with, really, apart from enter data. And in theory, the pitch would have been great. How would you pitch that? You'd pitch, integrated into their email system, integrated into Teams, built-in call recording because they use Teams Phone. You'd pitch just so many benefits to one CRM, and being able to ingest all that data from Excel and Salesforce easily. It would have been a dream. The only thing they saw was the cost. The only thing they saw was a headline cost figure per user. And of course, we hadn't prepped. We hadn't given them, if a user needs access to this bit of the database, this is the cost. We'd just given them the cost for the full license. And a full Dynamics license, as anyone knows, even for a charity, is not cheap. But actually, 90% of their team won't use a full license. They'll use a team member license, which is a couple of quid a month, which is not an issue. they pay more than that for what they're using on Salesforce. And again, just poorly presented change on our part, and poor requirements gathering on their part, because they hadn't internalized the productivity benefits they'd get from an integrated system yet. They hadn't done that bit internally. So we were trying to pitch them something that was 3 steps ahead of where they were. And of course, they latched onto the only thing that they could latch onto in the proposal, which was that cost figure, that figure in British pounds that looked rather high. And that was it. That was the ball game. We've actually gone back to that same customer last week, and we are now having a conversation about that change. And they are already starting to see the productivity benefits. And we're talking less about price and more about, ooh, can it do this? Can it do that? And there's excitement. And we've gone 3 levels down. So we were pitching at the CEO level, and we're now pitching to the actual people who do their fundraising and data gathering, who are now then increasingly pitching to their managers in Teams meetings. And we've got managers coming to us saying, oh, can we talk about this CRM? The staff seem really keen. What is it? Why is it so good? Just flipping that conversation and having almost the call is coming from inside the building effect.
Yes.
So the desire for a CRM is no longer the IT company wants to sell us a CRM, but more the staff want a CRM. They want to do less knuckleheaded admin work, really, which works great. I'm just going to open a window because I'm currently roasting.
Yeah. No, what a great example. And Tim, thanks for sharing, like, deja vu, having the same thing. We're going through budgeting right now, in the NinjaOne marketing team. And we actually work with a couple of agencies for things. And yeah, it is funny, that aspect of it. If the relationship is not handled in a certain way or set up with a certain way, you do get that classic feeling of, okay, they're coming and asking for something. It's just focusing on cost. What do you want now? Like, how much money do you want now? Basically, is what the reaction is. But it's interesting that and especially when you go to the person who is being hit, was essentially just the budget. Like, they don't know firsthand, that the owners of this don't necessarily know firsthand the pain points or the benefits. They are just being hit all the time by budget items, and so they do just see the numbers.
Yeah, their worldview shifts to, what is this going to cost me, rather than what is this going to save. We've been having the same communication recently around Copilot. So we've been pitching Copilot for nonprofits, which is just launched, to a bunch of customers. And again, they look at the cost. They look at that close to 20, 25 pound a month. And they're like, whoa. But actually, when we do the exercise with them, when we say, okay, we understand that it's a high price, but actually look at what you're paying for. Look at what it can replace. So, tot up your Grammarly subscription, the other 2 AI tools you're paying for, the time you're spending writing and rewriting, the amount of data you're leaking into ChatGPT so that they can churn the next model with your client's data. Like, once you actually add up all of this stuff into a nice, full kind of change management, kind of fully weighted conversation, actually, it becomes a little easier. And that's kind of like, so the way we've been retuning change control is still fairly processy. So it's still a set of steps. It's still a, I'm a list maker. It's still a list, but it's a much more comprehensive list. So starting with, assessing the need for change. And this is where, as MSPs, the fact that we can know our customers in a little more depth, and the fact that, most of us, I'd like to think, are service focused rather than pure metric focused. I'd like to think, most of us are focusing more on the service outcomes and less on, how many tickets and how much time. Perhaps you're still focusing on how much time, but that's a different conversation. We'll do that webinar another time. But assessing the need for change, understanding why the change is necessary and what specific outcomes you aim to achieve. And this is where customer maturity starts to creep in, because a lot of your customers, a lot of our customers just don't have the maturity to do that internally. They need a bit of hand holding to get there, which is fine. We're set up to do that. You might not be, and that might be one of your pain points for change management. is if your customers can't adequately express the outcomes they want from a change, the change is doomed to fail. Unless it's a very simple change, in which case maybe you'll get it through, but not optimally. Developing clear communication, so a clear message that explains what's changing and why. We used to be very good at explaining what's changing and really terrible at explaining why. We would omit so much of the why. And the why is important because the why allows them to skip past the objectionable bits of what.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's much easier to get hung up on, I have to change my password, than, oh, I need to change my password, but actually I need to change it because this way around will be easier for me to remember and I'll forget it less often and I'll have to go through that painful password reset process less often.
Well, that's interesting. So the way that you are positioning that, I mean, this is called out in the chat too. It's such a good example because you're not even just falling back on, okay, the reason why is because this is more secure. All the reasons you listed, like because these agencies, like these authorities say, obviously this is the more secure path to take. You're actually going to a different tack and saying, well, this is actually going to be easier for you.
Yeah, that's what we found is, and that kind of falls onto our third kind of bullet point in proposing change, which is identifying the audience, determining who actually needs to hear that message, who needs to hear about that change, and who needs to feed into how the change is going to happen. And increasingly for us, you know, that was the same as it would be for most MSPs. I think you'd pitch your change at your key contact because that's your advocate in the organization. It's the same person for everything. They're the person who gets your invoices paid. They're the person who ensures that everyone knows how to contact you. But actually, typically, and not in all cases, but at least in most of our cases, they also tend to be the bean counter. So when you try and bring them on board for change, again, first thing they zero in on is, what's this going to cost me? Which is not a good place to start change. So when we started segmenting the people feeding into change and also how we communicate about change into different groups. So we have a group of kind of what we would consider very involved stakeholders. So if we take the CRM example, these will be the people who are gathering fundraising information directly from end users who are actually inputting data into a CRM, into a spreadsheet currently. So we talk to them a lot about the proposed change. Then we'd probably talk to their supervisors and managers a little, just to find, you know, okay, if we were going to propose a new CRM system, what could it do for you? Where are your pain points currently? And this is where, if we step back to the CRM example, this is where we found out that there is a manager in this charity who once a month has to go through 80 plus spreadsheets, close to 80 spreadsheets, pull information out of each one, compile it into a report in Excel, again, another spreadsheet. So that's the extra spreadsheet, and then make graphs to send back to funders. So for them, I did a little demo because we use Dynamics internally. So all I did was go into Dynamics and show them the reporting screen, show them the ability for me to pull any bit of information out of Dynamic with a couple of clicks and report on it and make the charts. And that's it. That's that person sold. We didn't even have to talk to them about. They didn't ask once about cost. They didn't ask about timescales. As soon as they saw that their reporting went from 2 days of pain going through spreadsheets to clicking a button, that person's on side. They're sold. And they then, normally we would then kind of go the next step up to the person who's going to make the decision. In this case, we haven't had to do that yet because that manager has gone to the person above them and said, look, I need this. It's worth the cost because I'm spending 2 full days every month doing this. And what we get at the end of it is terrible. I've got funders coming back to us saying, we would have funded you, but actually you haven't evidenced the need. Because actually, by the time they've gone through all the spreadsheets, they can't get the right data in the right format to show the need. They know it's there. They know they need the money to do this service. They can't demonstrate it because they haven't got the right information. So we flipped this person who'd previously been a blocker into an advocate for change by showing them what would it do for them. And that's as you said, that's the flip, is what will it do? What will it do for the organization? Because whilst a lot of people are very passionate about the organization they work for, A lot more of them are slightly self-interested and care more about how's it going to make my job easier. Which is fine. I get it. That's the reason I'm into automation so much. I'm not into automation because it's great for everyone else. I don't share scripts with the community, much as I love the community. I don't share scripts with the community purely for the community's benefit. It makes my scripting better. The feedback I get from particularly the NinjaOne Discord is brutal, valuable, and has taught me things that I probably wouldn't have found out on my own with a million years' time. Like, yeah, it's great. And so selecting how we communicate then is the next part of the challenge. Email, snail mail, carrier pigeon, telephone calls, and actually with that we do a combination of all of them, but we've increasingly been trying to tie it all back into one place. So whenever if we have a phone call about an ongoing change management ticket that we've got open, we'll record it. We make sure everything gets recorded back into that single log. So there is one place where all communication about the change is recorded, regardless of who it's been sent to. We, at the beginning of our change management changes, and I'm doing this on purpose a little bit just because it tickles a particular part of my brain that's slightly likes trying to keep everyone else trying to keep up with it. We spent a lot of time preparing and training decision makers and leaders at our customers. So walking them through change control and change management. We brought in a consultant in change management who we had speak to them very briefly on a couple of webinars throughout June, and just talk to them about change management and change control. I thought it would be far more useful than it was. It's one of the things that if we were doing this again, we probably wouldn't do again with the consultant, because actually it's proven to be really beneficial for him. A lot of the organizations have been like, oh, we like your style. Come talk to us about how to change our organization. It's actually done very little for them understanding our change management process.
Well, I mean, I guess if nothing else, you've connected them with another valuable resource that reflects well on you and everything. But no, I hear you.
Yeah, that's useful. So then we kind of launch communication. So after we've done a bit of like prepping the relevant leaders on a specific change, we announce the change more widely. And this usually is driven by the organization. We let them announce their own changes. What we don't necessarily want to do is to always be the people announcing changes on behalf of every customer, because that quickly gets unsustainable. But also, we'd like, if there is any minor blowback on the change, if it's one that's not going to be well received and is going to require a lot of handholding, we'd like it to go to the organization before it reaches us. Just purely out of self-interest. I don't want swarms of angry customers, employees hitting the service desk with, why are you changing this? For each change, we add an area in Halo, which is our service desk, with a lot more detail about the change. So very specific implementation information, timescales, processes, any new responsibilities or expectations that come with the change. It's also typically mirrored to SharePoint within the customer's environment. So there's a one-stop place where anyone who wants to know more about this particular change thing can go and look, and it's all there. Everything about the change is documented at this point. And it cuts down on those repetitive tickets you'll get sometimes when you try and do a big change where people are like, what are you changing? Why are you changing it? I've just come back from holiday after 6 months. What's changing? So one place to send people, and then we can archive those folders off once the change is completed, if the change completes, of course. Ensuring there are opportunities for people to engage, provide feedback, discuss concerns. I don't think any of us would be naive enough to say we've gone into a change management process where there've never been a concern. Anyone had a perfect change management process where nobody raised any concerns? And if so, are you looking for a job? So yeah, ensuring there are places where people can express those feedbacks, and we do a mixture of anonymous and kind of in-person town hall stuff for bigger changes. For little changes, they might just get a Microsoft form. But for bigger changes, we give them the option to provide feedback in person on a webinar, or just an anonymous form. Because sometimes we found people want to sling mud at changes without it being attached to their name. And in some cases, that's resulted in actually really useful insights. In other cases, it's resulted in really, really just inappropriate messaging that we have to filter out. But yeah, that's life.
I've also seen this same.
Yeah, okay. So it's like the suggestion box on the wall. You know, you're going to get
absolutely.
you're going to get 1 or 2 gold things in there, and you're going to get an awful lot of stuff that smells suspiciously like excrement. So the thing we'd never done before with change control that felt really alien to us and was really new is monitoring the response. So not just like who's giving feedback, but actually more direct temperature taking. So if we've got a change ongoing and a tech goes on site, they will ask people around the office, so have you heard about the change to password management policies? How are you feeling about it? Genuinely, like, what are your concerns? So a lot more soft touch gathering of data points to also see, have they actually heard about it? Because what we'd never done before was actually check that people were aware. We'd never really thought of, like, we'd allowed the customer to control rollout of all communication and making sure it was observed. And for most customers, they're so busy that they're doing what they're supposed to do that actually they'd send out one email and then be quite happy when the change was forced out because the decision maker knew about it. They didn't care that the staff didn't know and were blindsided by this change on a Monday morning. As far as they were concerned, they'd sent out an email about it. So now we do a lot more monitoring of the response before the change actually goes into play. A lot more, are you aware of what's coming? Do you know what it means? And how do you feel about it? Most importantly, how do you feel about it? Then we spend a bit of time reiterating and reinforcing, especially if the monitoring is showing us that it's not taking. So lots more reminders and different ways of communicating it. In one case, recently, for what did we roll? Oh, moved an organization from Zoom, entirely using Zoom for all external facing meetings, to Teams. And they were very not happy about it because they were very stuck on, Zoom cannot do what Teams does, despite the fact that in this case, Zoom could do what Teams could do what they needed and what they were using Zoom quite basically. And in the end, we got to the point where reinforcing and reminding wasn't working and monitoring wasn't working. So in the end, we actually had the cupcakes made that just had a little, switching from Zoom to Teams on this date, written on rice paper and printed on the top of the cupcake, and we just dropped them into the office one day. After the cupcakes, everybody knew the change was coming. So that worked. Fairly cheap way of, giving people a bit of a sugar high and also getting them to realize that we were making the change. At this point, we'd committed to the change and we could help them come on side, but it wasn't going to go away, which is a really all too common approach to change we found from customers, is you will always have that fairly sizable percentage of your customer base who's like, oh, yeah, I've heard about that change. I don't like that change. I'll just pretend it's not going to happen and resist it quietly. So that reinforcing that actually change is coming, you can help them prepare for it. You can help them feel better about it. You can help assuage their concerns now, but under no circumstances is it going to stop at this point. It's going. It's happening.
So, Mikey, I'll play maybe not devil's advocate, but this sounds like a lot of work. So going back to the
an awful lot of work.
Well, so I mean, what would you say to maybe owners out there, or just leads of teams where adding these additional touch points and actually seeking out more comms and everything, sounds like you're adding work to the plate that's getting in the way of you want things to be your well-oiled machine, I guess. What would you say to those folks?
They're entirely right. It's definitely throwing a bit of a monkey wrench into the gears of the well-oiled machine, but there's a lot of upside here. Not just in having better change management process. That's one clear beneficiary, is your change management becomes far more consultative and involved, and you get better change outcomes. But that is incredibly sticky. It's stickier than anything else I found in terms of having customers see you as that enabling IT partner that is there to facilitate them being more efficient and growing their use of IT responsibly and securely, rather than this MSP that just takes my money and I never see what they do, which is absolutely how we've been perceived for a while. When you get really good at the automation and really good at the well-oiled service desk, you kind of fade into the background and become a bit invisible. And I think a lot of us, speaking, as an owner, a lot of us do reach a point eventually where you get things so well-oiled that actually you want to seek out touch points because you've lost them all. A lot of us are leveraging more and more AI and automation. And when we automate away those touch points for a lot of people who would ordinarily have reached the service desk and say, the printer is stuck, I can't print, when actually an AI has kicked off a script in Ninja to reset the print queue, which is what happens with us, and no one's talked to that person, that's someone we haven't actually engaged with. And for a lot of our customers, we've gone from almost every member of staff or every volunteer would have submitted at least one ticket to we've got a few employees where 50% of their staff base have never logged a ticket, even if they've been there for 4 years, 5 years. They've never logged a single ticket because they just don't need to. And actually, that's great and also terrifying because those people should be advocates for us.
Right.
And actually, they're the people who will stand there and say, oh, what did that IT company ever do? They look very expensive, but we never speak to them. They're never here.
Well, this kind of goes back to something I wanted to ask you too, with going back to the CRM example.
Yeah.
Kind of in a similar way. I mean, it seems like we're talking about the type of proactive work that, in theory, automation is supposed to free you from the repetitive stuff. So you can do the more proactive, impactful things. This seems like a good example of it, but talk to me a little bit more about the process there. It sounds like you were kind of seeking out. How did the CRM idea come across? Was this something that you sought out, or was this a request that kind of bubbled up after you discovered pain? Or it sounds like something that you guys were able to identify. This could really help.
Very much a request that bubbled up after we found pain.
Okay.
But also after, as some of the best change conversations go, after the customer had managed to fight through the layers of us trying to avoid the pain being our pain and made it our pain. So typically, we've been aware of these spreadsheets for a while, and we'd resisted. Every attempt of, can you help me change this spreadsheet? Nope, absolutely not. No, we're not going to get involved in your complex spreadsheets. Data gathering, if you've got a technical issue with them, that's fine. We'll help you solve the technical issue, but we're not going to help you design the spreadsheets. It's beyond kind of where we're set up to help as an MSP. If you want a systems approach to storing and processing that data, we can talk about that, but we're not going to start playing with the spreadsheets for you. And they'd found a way around it. So they got on the spreadsheets so naughty and so complex through, by the time we'd looked at it, we went through the list of people who'd made changes, and there were about 18 people who'd changed one spreadsheet, adding fields and moving rows around, oftentimes at the same time, oftentimes without talking to each other, and from completely different teams at different ends of Wales. And in one wonderful case, in completely different languages. So someone had renamed all the column headings to Welsh at the same time as someone was fixing the English in them. So that was a very
What was the size of those columns? They must have been massive.
In some cases. But in some cases, just because I've been learning more and more Welsh, in some cases, Welsh has a really succinct word to do what English does, a long word. Night before or evening before last in English, neithier in Welsh. They've got a word for it. That specific thing, evening before last. So, in some cases they win, and in some cases English wins. But they'd gotten the spreadsheet so naughty that actually there was a point where it was hopelessly corrupt, and we had to go in and essentially rebuild it because the information was critical to them. And at that point, that was when we started looking at a CRM and a pitch to get rid of the spreadsheets, because I'm painfully aware that was one spreadsheet, and that's not the most complex one that exists, nor is it the most used one that exists. And if that one was ended up hopelessly corrupt, it's only a matter of time before some of the really painful ones drop into us and we have no choice but to fix them. So yeah, a little bit self-interested as most real change conversations tend to be driven by a bit of self-interest on either end.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we are doing more, especially so with these increased touch points that we're finding as we try to navigate this change control process, and increasingly taking the time to go and talk to customers, whether in person or online, about how they're feeling with ongoing change, we are also then identifying other candidates for change, but also alterations to the scope of change. This CRM initially started for this organization just for their fundraising team, who were kind of the worst offenders with many complex spreadsheets because of the nature of what they had to do. And actually, from then, it's kind of snowballed to include their employment team and their education team, who are also all working off of these complex spreadsheets. But actually, the funding team also need to see that data. You know, if they want new funding for education, they need to be able to give attendance figures. They need to be able to see how many people are coming back from classes regularly, and how many people like the classes, and how many women attend the classes to get funding for more classes for women with childcare. So actually realizing that unsiloing all this data, that's a word I feel like I've just made up, but I'm going to go with it. Unsiloing all this data, joining it back up into one place where it can be reported across the whole organization, but without in a system that allows us to still do permissions control and manage the data responsibly, actually turns out to be exactly what they need to be doing, and the right conversation to be having with them. And initially, from just a fundraising focused CRM, what we're now looking at with them is very different because of the change control conversations, because of having conversations with people and widening beyond the fundraising team to talk to people and say, have you been asked about CRM systems? Have you ever spoken to anyone about a better way of managing this chaos? And it turns out, no one had ever spoken to them that there was a better way. They joined the organization and had inherited a spreadsheet, and they thought that was just how it had to happen.
I think this is such a great takeaway for folks, is to think through, you know, it very well could have been that that there was a request that was made. In this case, it was, hey, can you help us with this spreadsheet? And some people would say yes, because that's what you say to the customer, right?
I see. We do have a very different approach, and this is when I say to people that we're a bit more of a strict MSP. We do tend to stick fairly tightly to our scope of work, and in some cases to our detriment. In this case, to our detriment, because our scope of work would have said that actually, no, designing a spreadsheet for you to store data in is way outside of the responsibility for kind of IT support. But actually, it's squarely in the responsibility of an MSP and being an enabling IT partner. And actually, we've realized from this that we have some internal change to do still to not move away from our scope of work, but to ensure that our scope of work is flexible enough that we can still be enabling and drop the hammer when we need to. You know, when the customer comes to us and said, no, I don't want MFA, and we say, bye-bye. You know, that's your choice. Your choice is MFA or bye-bye. Sometimes there isn't a nice, fluffy change control process. Sometimes it's do this or go away.
Yeah, you're not seeking people's opinions on those things.
No. Yeah, we have some red lines still, but increasingly blurring the lines where we can blur the lines.
Do you have a set cadence, I guess, for surfacing these things? Do they happen naturally? Obviously, you're undergoing this change yourself. But does this fit into where your QBRs or whatever you would want to call them, your annual reviews or anything like that?
Yeah. So we will typically at least update on any ongoing change during. We don't do QBRs. We tend to try and do bi-monthly. Depends on the customer, though. Some want monthly. One once every 6 months. They don't like a lot of. We find other ways to communicate with them because they don't want a meeting every quarter. Despite the fact that we do in fact end up having a meeting every quarter, they don't want one scheduled. So yeah, it varies. We will raise it when we're doing a regular review, but we will also find time in any interaction with them to try and talk about change increasingly. So to try and prospect for pain points. for a couple of reasons. Partly, we like the project work. It keeps us busy, and it also, it's generally not terrible financially to get into. Sometimes it has been, but that's more that I'm terrible at pricing projects sometimes.
That's
we
a whole
can
other
do it.
stream right there.
Yeah, we can do it for that. And, it takes 10 times as long, and you've given them a fixed price, and suddenly someone's crying, and it's usually me. But yeah, every touch point is an opportunity to prospect for pain points and for things that could change is increasingly what we're trying to do. Doesn't always work. Sometimes they do just want the printer to be reset, and they don't want to talk about, changing away from printers. Really just trying to drive an appreciation for change as well. We did have a customer come back to us recently, relatively new customer. So we onboarded them in July, and they've just had their kind of first set of major changes as part of onboarding. And our onboarding is very much a mixed bag of, there's this category of things that we have to change. You don't really get a choice in them. You've signed a contract with us as a customer, and some things they're just going to have to change. MFA and no more shared user accounts, and lots of things are just going to change, and they're going to be painful. And then there are changes that you have a little more agency over. And actually, for the first time now, they've gone a whole month, the whole of October, without raising a single ticket. And this was a customer who would have maybe 10 hours of lost productivity a week just waiting for machines to do things. Not because the machines were old, they're fairly new, just because things were poorly configured and rather shoddily set up, because they weren't working with MSP, they were working with a break fix guy. And it's been nice to see the feedback of their staff saying, okay, we understand the change was painful. We're still not quite over it, but we get why it's happened. Finally, we get why it happened. We get why it had to happen. And that's been nice to see in other aspects as well of navigating this, of actually even the unpleasant change. We're now getting customers coming back to us and saying, we get that wasn't, it still doesn't feel nice, but I understand why it happened now. Part of that is them seeing the results, and part of that is actually the final thing on our kind of process checklist, really, which is the support and follow-up, ongoing support for changes. It's easy to think of kind of a change control ticket as a ticket, because for most of us in our systems, they are a change control ticket. It's something that we open whilst the change is going on, and then we close it and it's done. But actually, there's a lasting impact of change that we still have to manage as MSPs, whether we want to or not, which is constantly kind of reminding people that it has changed for a while, even after you close the change control ticket, because it's changed, it's finished. But also offering those kind of resources that wrap around the end of the change, training, guides, access to tools that can help them navigate the change in new systems. And for a long time, remind them what they're supposed to be doing, because a lot of them will dip in these systems for a little while that you've just changed. And finally, we haven't hit our first one yet that we're going to start doing this for, but we have set reminders to celebrate milestones. So for the CRM one, on the year's anniversary of the CRM change, we will send them, something nice, probably a cake. Probably just because the kind of personality that we tend to have with our customers tends to be fairly tongue-in-cheek. It'll probably be a slightly tongue-in-cheek, slightly sarcastic message about the kind of fraught nature of the process and how stressed everybody got right on crunch time. Because on both sides, that was just like the night before switching on the CRM was not a happy night. So a little nudge at that, just to kind of, that tension release you feel when someone makes a joke about that really stressful time, and you're like, oh yeah, now I can laugh about it.
Yeah. Well, it's such a, I love that touch
anniversaries of particularly the bigger changes, but increasingly and importantly, not to forget also the little ones, because it's easy to celebrate, that big CRM switch off, but actually for Doris on reception, I don't actually have a customer with a Doris on reception. I need to get one. That might be a criteria for the next customer. But
She's great.
like Doris on reception, she's probably more impacted by the change to the password policy, and she would probably very much appreciate, on the anniversary of the password change having taken effect, a nice cupcake to go with her coffee in the morning. Just that little touch point to remind her that actually she made it through. She made it through that process change, and she's better for it. And she's got a cupcake, because who doesn't like a cupcake?
I love this. I love this touch that you're suggesting here, and I mean, it really, because in addition, I mean, one thing I put my marketing hat on, and one thing I'm always thinking about is testimonials, and another case to get those quotes. And also case studies, right? Having going into these change projects with a sense of, okay, we're going to establish some benchmarks. You had a stat earlier on where you said, there was a company that you were working with that was losing X amount of productivity per week.
About 10 hours.
Right, 10 hours per week. And so then being able to have that document, and then being able to go back and celebrate that, that has been a change.
And also being able to contrast, and quite it's one of those times when actually you make a chart of it, just because I like making charts sometimes, and you make a chart of it and it turns out to be the most useless chart in the world because it happens quicker than you expected. So September was still a terrible month for them productivity wise. I think September, we worked out they lost about 22 hours of kind of productive time. And then you go into October and it was down to 1 hour, 75 minutes for the whole month. And actually, I put it in a chart and I'm like, I can't use this chart for anything because it just looks ridiculous. It's just a diagonal line. This is useless. But actually, it's really nice to see quite such a stark change. And it was also a nice point to remind them that, because they were like, oh, that's still 1.75. When are we going to get it down to 0? And actually reminding them that nope. No, we started this, if we look back to the discussions and the meeting notes when we did this early, you never get to 0. There's always something. There will always be someone who comes in, tries to do something important, turns on their computer, and Windows does, I've got 20 updates to install, see you in an hour. It's always going to happen. You're never going to get away from it. Doesn't matter how well you plan. But actually, a drastic improvement is worth celebrating.
100%. And anything that's reminding folks of avoiding that issue of, hey, there's a lot of issues. I haven't seen those recently. So what are you doing for me now? Just reminders, right?
So we have increasingly started having our automations open tickets and then immediately close the tickets, so that when all that automation fires in the background, we still have a ticket, so that when we do our reports on tickets for customers during our kind of QBRs, where the queue is flexible and can be replaced by any number of letters, but when we do our kind of asterisk BRs, we report on tickets, what was open, what was closed, what categories, what the resolutions look like, times, kind of what automation tickets happened during, what did we do that you didn't see? And we've been doing that now for about a year, and actually it's quite startling, just the amount of stuff that would ordinarily have been someone raising a ticket and someone having experienced a problem and then raising a ticket. And yeah, it really, you can automate yourself into the position where the only thing customers say about you is, what do you do? What are we paying you for? Which is, it's great to have the automation, but it's a terrifying consequence that actually knowing that you might drive customers to start shopping around because you're not visible enough anymore.
Right.
So we've also kind of, as part of this, realized that one of the changes we've been making, or we're going to continue making, is we didn't typically obfuscate our tools very much. but we did still obfuscate them a little bit. And we're not doing that anymore. We are very proudly saying to customers, we use NinjaOne to manage your devices. We're very proudly saying to customers, we use Halo to manage your tickets. We're slightly less proudly saying to customers, we use Halo to manage your tickets when Halo releases an update that goes slightly wonky and suddenly starts muting key contacts. But that's a different problem. But we're being a little more frank with customers about what we use and why, because actually we're starting to see that it's a lot easier for them to buy into these systems that they are paying for if they can see what we're doing and how we're doing things with these tools and why we're picking certain tools. So we've now got customers, and I don't think most Ninja customers would have end users aware of Ninja being a thing.
Right.
We've got customers now where end users are aware that Ninja is a thing. Partly because we've stopped obfuscating it, partly because we've been pushing them into Ninja to do things themselves a bit more. And also because a lot of us are now rocking Ninja t-shirts or lanyards or stickers, which is helping. But actually, it's going into that same, trying to make ourselves and also the partners we use a bit more visible to customers and demonstrate that although you might not speak to us, you might never speak to Ninja. And this is kind of where the tie-in was for us, was our customers were never aware of Ninja. But actually, now that they are, and they can start to see what Ninja does in the background, it also helps them realize that we have the same problem they do. We pay Ninja a fair amount of money for a system that actually, most of the time, we don't see because it's working really well. And we've automated so much around Ninja that we don't actually see it. And actually for them, we're that link in their chain. We've automated so much for them that they don't see us very often, but we're still there and what we're doing is still worth paying for. So kind of helping them see that problem cascades right up the chain, and actually they just need to think about what they're getting a different way. And part of that, as you said, comes effectively in case studies. It's always nice to do a case study with a customer and say they were losing this much time and now they're not, and then send that to existing customers, which is one thing I don't know if many of us do as MSPs. But actually, slight thing for Ninja, I don't really see Ninja doing case studies. I know they kind of silently get posted, but your existing customers don't see all your nice new case studies that actually reinforce the business case for keeping Ninja.
Absolutely. And being month to month and just having that reminder. I think it's super important. So I'm glad that there we go. We have just now surfaced a change that we can interact on the marketing side. I think that there's also maybe a level of we're right here at the top of the hour, but I guess any last words, final suggestions from that you wanted to make sure that you added, and maybe we could get into a little bit about I don't know if maybe you've been fortunate enough to, as you're rethinking your change management process and you've been rolling this out, it's all been thumbs up successes, or or whether, like Chris points out, he's spent all the time. MFA can be such an uphill battle in some cases, and then he finally gets the buy-in.
Yeah, exactly. Have had exactly what he had as well, where you go through that entire process, with or without the change control process, but you go through the entire pain of convincing them that yes, you are turning MFA on, whether it's a choice of theirs or not. Get to the point where you turn it on, you've sold them finally that it's happening, and then you try and turn it on and the whole world just burns down around you because Microsoft have done something. Yeah, been there. Also done the kind of the reminder of why we back up and that kind of backup screen test. So during the CRM migration, took one of the bigger spreadsheets, stripped out all the macros from the spreadsheet, gave it a very cursory glance over. Yeah, data looks fine. Imported it into Dynamics. and got absolutely garbled garbage at the back of it. Because actually it turned out that like 4 of the key columns that were tying records together only worked with the macros left in. And at this point, we changed the spreadsheet so much and kind of saved it back to the original location that no, the only thing to do was to go into the backup and pull out this single spreadsheet from the backup. So that was fun. No matter how much we planned the change and how much you communicated, there was nothing that could really assuage the slight bit of damage that's been done by the education manager logging in, going to look at her class records and finding just gobbledygook, just absolute nonsense all over the place. And then having to unpick all that and redo the import was not fun. And Dynamics makes it easier than most with the sandbox environment. So at this point, we were working in a sandbox environment, but still not the best look in the world. And realizing that actually internally, our change management was terrible. Like externally, our change management was okay, a little inflexible, terrible communication, but generally okay, fairly middle of the road. But our internal change management was virtually non-existent. We would raise change management tickets internally and they would just kind of sit there. And we had this regular rolling change management meeting where we'd review customer changes and then never get to the internal stuff. And it was just generally really poor. And now it's slightly improved in that we are now aware that there's a problem. We haven't addressed it yet. We haven't even begun to address it yet, but we're aware there's a problem. And knowing is, as I say, knowing is half the battle. So I feel great knowing that we're glass half full. We're almost done. Of course, we haven't started addressing it, but I'm just going to optimistically cling on to knowing is half the battle, and I'm halfway there.
100%. I am deeply of that mindset. You're not always going to like what you find, but you would much rather have found it, right? Mikey, we're at time here. Thank you so much for hopping on. We'll see you in the Discord, and we'll have you back on very soon. I'm sure of it.
Yes, it's been a blast, and thank you, audience, like all of you. You guys are great. And again, thank you, Ninja. Like the opportunity to have these conversations and for the community to be this involved in pitching these webinars to Ninja. And this was like for the other folks in the comments, if you've got a webinar idea, this was nothing more than me pitching to Ninja. I'd like to talk about this subject, and Ninja going, yeah, let's do it. And then, of course, me going and not preparing anything for months on end, and Robin finally going, are you still good for that webinar you volunteered to do? And me going, oh, yes, I'm fine. As is tradition. But just like if you've got a webinar idea, go pitch it to Jonathan or Robin and like see where they take it. Like some of the cool, crazy, like a ninja streams just come from the community pitching ideas. And I love every one of them. Like some of these things have taught me so much, which is why I like sharing back. This is my second one and I've already got the third one lined up. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Such a good call out. Please, everybody. I mean, if you think it's something small and just unique to you, it's probably not, first of all.
No.
And
also, you don't have to do it yourself. Like worst case scenario, pitch the idea and see if someone else latches on and goes, oh yeah, I want to present on that one. There's a joint one that I'll be doing with I don't think it's been scheduled yet, but there is a joint conversation I'll be having with another ninja who pitched the idea and was like, I've got this idea for a webinar, but I can't carry the whole thing. And I was like, yeah, I like this. And we're just going to split it down the middle. It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Team up, put things out there. We may, who knows, I may have a good idea that could, for once that could spin off things too. What makes these things so awesome is, you all know from being a part of the community and the Discord and all the great external communities like MSP Geek and everything too. It really is a special space where folks have a ton to share and are eager to do it. Thank you for being part of this community, for making it so great, and consider jumping in and being another voice in it that's actively sharing, because it's what makes it special.
Cool. Well, thank you all, and good evening.
Yeah. Have a good evening. Have a good afternoon.